Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Happiness Quest. My name is Jess Stutel from the Center for Transformation at Plymouth State University.
And I'm Dr. Maria Sanders, a philosophy professor at Plymouth State University and CEO of Philosophy for Life. And today we have a guest, Dr. Kathleen Norris. Dr. Norris has taught high school in Alaska and was also a principal in Alaska. She's taught English in Japan. She's been a guidance director and director of curriculum and assessment right here in Plymouth at Plymouth Regional High School. And she's also taught at both the undergraduate and graduate levels at Plymouth State University and was director of the doctoral program in education at Plymouth State University. Wow, impressive career. Welcome to the program.
Well, I'm old, so I've had plenty of time.
We're delighted that you're on the show with us today. And I have to say, while we're talking about retirement, I never thought this one was actually going to retire. So I am so impressed with what you've been doing, the adventures that you have been experiencing.
Well, and that's really why we invited her to come on the program, is because she's had a very full and extremely impressive career, but she is doing retirement as impressively. Yes. And so today's program will focus on finding happiness in retirement. And I guess we should begin by emphasizing the constant theme throughout our program that this is not a one-size-fits-all by any means. But I think for most of our viewers, you'll find some kernels in there that may help, especially if you're approaching those retirement years and wondering what that's going to look like in a country where, quite honestly, our identity is wrapped up in our work to a large extent. So, Kathleen, how long has it been now since you've been retired?
About a year and a half.
Okay, so still a newbie to the retirement world.
Still a novice retiree. Yes.
But you're doing it right.
But I'm aspiring to be a role model of early retirement for people coming behind me because it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm already dreaming about retirement based on the photos that you post online, that you take throughout your travels. It looks amazing.
Well, I have to tell you, it was like probably just a month after you had retired. And the first time I had seen you, you had this glow of happiness. That's why I'm like, ooh, retirement. Maybe I should consider retiring. What has the last year and a half looked like?
Well, it's just been very fast. It's gone by very quickly. But I've been able to travel. I'm a Fulbright specialist, and so I was assigned in Kosovo for a month, 3 weeks, to do some work with their university, the University of Pristina. And I've taken some just pleasure trips as well to see family and friends and revisit old places. We had a 30-year reunion from my teaching position in Japan just last month. And so it's been sort of moving from trip to trip and opportunity to opportunity. And in some ways, I feel sort of like I'm 12. Like I guess just get to pick what I'm doing. I'm able to choose. The schedule's my own. And though I've been very active and had a lot of activities and travel, I don't have that sort of overwhelming sense of obligation to a larger institution or to a larger job, really. All of the decisions I make are my own, and how I spend my time and where I go and what I do, and even the small work jobs I do, they're all a choice. And that takes a large burden off your shoulders.
Yeah. It's an interesting shift where we become basically our own guider through our life. Did you find any challenges as you transitioned into kind of that retirement lifestyle?
Really, no. It was quite easy.
So the timing was right.
Yeah, the timing was right. I've always believed, I've made different transitions in my life in different jobs and different locations. And I've always found that it's best to leave when you are already very happy and you're not too burnt out and you're not tired and everything is going really well. So if you can make a transition, for me, if I can make a transition at the top of my game, that's ideal. And that's generally what's happened. And so this transition was very similar to other transitions I've made in that I couldn't have imagined a better professional life. I couldn't have imagined any more that I would need to do or want to do for my professional identity. And so why not take a chance and move on to something else? And it's not been difficult to find other things to do.
I was going to say, you're quite busy. You're so busy that you don't have time for our bowling league. So we miss you, bowling. But it's not like you're sitting around being bored. You're really engaged in life and experiencing it. And
Well, and just choosing. So I'm golfing more.
Yeah.
I'm walking more, traveling more, bicycling more. But it's, for example, to go bowling, it's an hour and a half away
I know.
and
We have a
driving.
bowling alley right here.
It's a
somewhere.
commitment, Jess, to
Yeah.
bowl.
And
But we
so-
miss her.
Yeah,
The
so
bowling alley.
I don't need to drive. I
Yeah.
can make a decision not to make that kind of drive for the short time that we'd be bowling. Where when I was working, I was closer to the alley. It was not
Right.
such a big drive. But by removing myself to home,
Yeah.
it's more of a driving challenge, and I don't like to use the gas and the time sitting in a car. So
But it's interesting when you talk about being busy. And I heard the term a couple of times already, engaged, and how engaged you are. Because I do think filling the time looks differently for different people depending upon who's retiring and in particular how much planning went into that retirement. I'll use as an example my father when he retired, because he was also a very hard worker. And in fact, most of my memories growing up somehow involved him with working, whether it was actually at his job, he was a mechanical engineer, or he built our house from scratch, really. And so there was always projects around the house, but he was always working. And when he retired, he struggled with retirement. And some of it I do think has to do with the type of planning that goes into it. He financially planned, but I'm not sure he mentally and emotionally planned on how that would, in a way, shift the identity of who he was and this idea of staying busy, filling time. To give you some examples of initially what my father did to fill his time, he stayed busy. But it was things like he decided to plant rhododendrons around our property, which
That
was
sounds lovely.
2 acres of rhododendrons. There was over 100 of these, and they were all the same colors. I think they were all blue except for one. There was one that was red, and it just came that way.
Intentionally?
No,
Oh,
it came that way accidentally in the package. And today it's still that way, because I remember the first time I came back, by then I was living in St. Louis, came home to visit, and he had just planted all these, and they were in full bloom. I'm like, why the red one? It's like, and I'm looking for the meaning in it. And he's like, by the time you plant 99, the 100th one, you don't care about the color. You're not looking
Yeah.
to change the color.
Right.
And so
what it is.
there were a lot of these projects. I remember we were trying to help him find things to fill this time he suddenly discovered he had. My sister got just about every little project you could think of, whether it was building a clock or putting a puzzle together, and she would send these to my father, and he created what he called a special shelf for her. He never opened any of them. This was not what he was interested in, because his interests had shifted as he aged, and also in retirement. When he built things like clocks, it was because we needed a clock in the house for the family, not because he was interested in building a clock.
Yeah.
And so
pragmatic, not a hobby.
right. And so one day when she came home, she gathers up all the stuff on her shelf and took it back to her place. But it's interesting, this idea of filling time, because all too often I do hear retirees just searching for ways to fill the time, and that's not what I'm hearing. Instead, it feels more like you're choosing because you have way too many things that are like options compared to the time that you have to fit them in. So I heard one is, well, I don't necessarily have to make the drive anymore if I don't feel like making the drive. Are there other shifts in how you decide how you're going to spend your time or what you're going to do now that you're retired? Or is it all pretty much in the moment, whatever I feel like that day?
Well, I have some activities that are scheduled, that are regular, and that I enjoy. I think the fundamental decision point is: am I having fun? Am I enjoying it? Is the entire aspect of it something that I want to do? And I think in our professional lives, if we're happy, 90% of what we do we probably love. And we're good at, and we get better at, and we're challenged, and it has all the stimulation and all the things that you need. But there might be about 10% that's, for me, maybe doing some paperwork or some, administrivia that isn't really the core of the joy of the
Not as
job.
fulfilling.
It just has to get done.
There's things that have to get done.
Why work has
Yeah.
the definition that it has.
Yeah, and so, someone asks you for a report, or someone asks you to
Yeah.
do something that you can do, you're happy to do, but it's the control, the locus of control is sort of outside of you. Your profession makes demands on you. And I think the shift is, well, I don't have that 10% of things I don't really want to be doing anymore. So 100% of what I'm choosing is my own choice. And so I can schedule myself the way I want to schedule myself. And it doesn't mean I'm not working in the sense of I'm teaching Chinese children online. I work for Westat, a research company, doing the national assessment every other year. But it's a decision I can make for that finite period of time. And I think that's the other piece of the work kind of aspect, the picking up, even if it's volunteer jobs or some kind of work, is that they have a sense of time that's finite. It's not like signing up for a career, like I'll stay here 5 to 7 years, I'll keep going. It's like, no, I'll do this.
It's on your terms.
Today, if
Yeah.
I'm still happy, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll do it for this year. If I'm still happy 2 years from now and I want to try it again, I'll do
So
that.
much shorter time frames
But they're
and lots of
shorter.
exit routes, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's
that-
exit routes and the opportunity to work around those jobs or those pieces. So there's just, I think, truly much more of a sense of personal control over my time and over my activities, and the decisions that I make put me in that 100% of bliss doing whatever I'm doing. And if I don't wish to continue doing something,
You don't have to.
I don't have to.
So, in thinking about today's show, I was reflecting on my parents' retirement, and they absolutely love retirement. They are such happy people, and in fact, I saw a transition in them. It was like a weight lifted off their shoulders. What is different about my parents, and I think your experience in your career, is that my parents didn't necessarily love their jobs. They were really hard workers, and they really wanted to provide for my brother and I. But they were so ecstatic when they could retire. And they spend all kinds of time with my kids, and that's so lovely, and watching those relationships. To the point where now they're so retired that they have a clock, a day clock, so they know what day it is when they have to, come and babysit.
Yeah, I'm not sure what day it is.
Exactly, you have to remind yourself. But in thinking about your career, and I was one of your students, I know how much you love teaching, how much you still love teaching, and your passion was very contagious. You walk into a classroom and you could tell that you were happy, and that radiated. And so I wonder, was there any sense of loss in knowing that you weren't going to be walking into that classroom on a daily basis? Or it was a pretty smooth transition because you can choose.
Well, I still do teach,
Yeah.
and so no, there was no sense of loss.
Yeah.
But I would say in my case it was a very soft transition. I was able to continue teaching, so I still teach throughout the year, just not as much, and I teach the courses that I really want to teach, and so there's no obligatory courses that are thrown in there. I can decide semester to semester if I want to keep teaching. And so the energy and the motivation to do that persists. And so as long as that's true, I'll keep doing it. But if at some point I decide that I'd rather do something else, or the schedule doesn't work, I have some trip I need to take, then I can make that decision and it won't upset the system. So I think when I was full-time or working fully in any position that I've had, there's a sense that if you were to leave or stop, there would be a gap. Like somebody would have to take over. You'd be creating a hardship for other people. But in a retirement side of things, you're that extra person, and so you're sort of
Interesting.
Easy to replace.
Sounds so great. I can't wait for retirement. Sign me up.
Really? But one thing I'm hearing that I think is crucial, and it does come back to this knowing ourselves, what you shared with your parents, they were very content to just walk away from everything in their job on the day of retirement. I didn't hear that from what you
Right.
were saying, because as you talk about your days being fully employed, and that, as you mentioned, I think you said 80% of it or 90% of it were things you enjoyed.
Right.
So to walk away from all of that is going to have a negative impact at
Right.
that point. So
Yeah.
perhaps the lesson here is it doesn't have to be, if we think
All
of
or
it as
nothing,
soft and a
right?
hard retirement, we choose, do we want to have a soft retirement, which in hindsight is what my father should have done.
Right.
How he found happiness in retirement is he went back to work part-time.
Yes.
He would go in a couple days a week, loved it, didn't have any of the stress because he was the extra person, just
Right.
like you're
Yes.
describing. And then eventually, I don't even know offhand how many years he did that. It was quite a few years. He got tired of that and said, I'm done now. But it was this soft way of moving into retirement. So I guess as the individual, we have to
You
decide.
have to know yourself,
which
and know what you're
works better.
comfortable with. I
Yeah.
can't imagine myself ever completely stepping away from teaching or being involved in community building and
Right.
community events. But to have the freedom to choose what you're most passionate about and to lean into those projects and then to take time for yourself, I think that sounds lovely, Kathleen.
Well, and if you're happy, I think if you're miserable before you retire, you might not just flip into happiness.
yeah,
you know.
right. Well,
Right.
exactly.
There's some things bringing that
Yeah.
unhappiness.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that needs to be processed, I'm sure, along the way. For
Yeah.
sure.
So for some people,
Yeah.
I think the job creates a frame
Yes.
so they feel valued and they have an identity that's matched up with that. But if you're just internally pretty happy, which I have been,
You always have been. Yeah.
then in any position or any situation, I really don't change that. I don't lose that about myself. So the frame, for me, the profession or the frame is really external.
Yes.
And in retirement, I'm the frame. So my frame is me. So I'm not any less responsible in a way for what I do or who I am responsible to. But the sense of choice and the sense of not, I suppose in a way, not having that burden that if I didn't get something done
You're
or
letting people
I
down.
was letting someone down or something, that that kind of pressure, that feeling of pressure is just, it's just lifted. It's not, it's just a lightening kind of responsibility.
Well, we've talked multiple times about the impact stress has on happiness. And again, removing all stress isn't necessarily the answer. It's finding that happy balance that we're motivated by the stress, but not feeling the pressure, not feeling overwhelmed by the stress. And I guess I would come back to the planning that went into this, because when I think about the stresses that are typically present in retirement, a big one for most people will be financial. You know, can I really afford to retire? What if something catastrophic happens, either externally or to myself, my health? You know, can I actually, because if you think about it, that's what's driving a lot of people to stay in the workforce.
Yeah.
You have that steady paycheck coming in.
But it's a balance, and it's about knowing when is the right time, like I heard you talk about, and watching both my parents and my in-laws transition to retirement. For my mom, she had a health condition that led to her retirement, and it was work-related. And so my dad went through the process of reflection and thinking about, well, how much time do we have in retirement?
And how do we wanna spend it?
One, can we financially do it? But how do we want to spend these years together? Because you don't know how many years you have left. And when you have a health scare like my mom did, and now she's doing remarkably well, but you really have to think about that. How much time do we have to spend? And
Well,
we want to
unfortunately,
maximize it.
a lot of people wait too long
Right.
to retire.
Right.
And they have these grandiose plans of traveling the world, and they're having trouble walking now. You know, so there is that balance and finding the right time. What sorts of things did you put in place, both financially as well as maybe emotionally, mentally, physically, health-wise, to work towards retirement?
Well, I think it's financially, it was really key that I started thinking about this when I was actually 24 years old.
So you started young.
Wow, I need to get planning.
Yes, I can help you with that. But I've been fortunate to have good people around me, all my life, and I was helped to understand the value of putting aside some money when I was young, and that amount of money was $50. It wasn't a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of money. I was a volunteer teacher, then I was a part-time teacher in a system that was paying, a few $1,000s a year was my salary. So I didn't have extra money to put aside, but
And in our 20s, $50 is a lot.
A lot of
yeah,
money.
Yeah,
it was
that
huge.
feels like a lot.
And it was Alaska. I mean, a pizza cost $25.
Yeah.
So, so to think of finding $50 was impossible. It was crazy. But a friend explained to me, because of using a 403B, a retirement vehicle, it wouldn't be $50 because it would be pre-tax, and I could probably come up with $30, and how this would work. And so I was like, okay. So from that time, I just started putting that money away, and thinking, if I did that, because there was a little guide that you could retire. If I did that, it would do this magical stuff, because I didn't quite understand
interest, yeah, all
compound,
that, yeah.
financing. That I could retire when I was 55. And in Alaska, that was a fairly common thing for people to do. So I thought, okay, well, that sounds good. But to me, at 24, 55 sounded like 105. I mean,
Right.
it's just
So far away.
We don't have any real perspective when we're young. I don't think we
Right.
can really see past like twice our age. We just can't. So, but putting that little bit of money aside, putting it aside, and then whenever I had an increase, cost of living rate. I mean, I never have had giant increases, but whenever there's been a little thing, I just took that extra money and applied it so that I kept living kind of the same way, but putting money aside for retirement. And the market dropped. I mean, I've been putting money in the retirement for almost 40 years. I mean,
Right.
it's a long time. So, every decade there's been some kind of
Fluctuates.
big
Yeah.
drop, but it still was like, yeah, but I can work till I'm 70. I can't, So staying really healthy enough, being fortunate enough to be healthy enough to continue to work if I needed to, but having that kind of target, like, well, in my mind, somehow it locked in that if I just keep putting in as much as I can, I might be able to retire, when I'm
At some
55.
point, yeah.
And that sounded good. It sounded
Yeah.
like then I could do, I don't know, something else. But I think for me it was just having the sense of safety in a way that if something did happen, if I did have an illness or something happened, that I wouldn't be left destitute because I had put away money for retirement. So even if it wasn't a choice, at that point, if something were to happen at some point,
You had some kind of safety.
there
net
was like
there,
a
yeah.
nice safety net,
Right.
kind of a rainy day thing, and it
Yeah.
was tucked away. And no matter what other financial challenges that we all have trying to build a house or buy a house or move or do these things, I never stopped that kind of contribution. And that's really what allowed me to financially to make the shift. But I really feel a need for young people, even in high school age, but certainly in their early 20s, to get financially educated about the value. $50, $10, it doesn't matter. If whatever you can possibly put aside, in the end, you'll have this nest egg that you can then be comfortable with, and not be in a panic about, oh, I need a job or I have to work.
Yeah, that is so valuable, because I was in the same boat as you. In my 20s, I did not see the value of it. Fortunately for myself, I started in higher ed. And so even in my 20s, I was teaching college. Well, a lot of the college systems forced these retirements on us. And that's how it felt to me in my 20s. I'm like, okay, I can see where this benefits those old professors, but
You couldn't
why do
imagine
I?
yourself
Right,
that
I
age.
could
It's
not
benefited you
imagine
more,
it.
actually,
Right,
yeah.
and it was actually to our benefit the
Yeah.
most. It really was.
Yeah.
And so if there is a way, especially for people today that, in their 20s, even high school, starting younger, to be able to put it, and I think the key here is to put it somewhere where you can't easily access it.
Yeah.
As those little life challenges popped up, I'm sure your mind didn't go to tapping into that because
Yeah.
it felt remote. It felt removed.
It felt remote, although I did have to borrow out of it, 2 different times to buy houses in Alaska and here. But it was like, I need to pay that back as soon,
Sounds
not only because of the interest and all, that it costs you to borrow out of
Yeah.
your retirement, not not a penalty for withdrawing, but I didn't have other credit. I didn't have enough money in any other vehicle, and I did have it. So it provided the opportunity.
Served another purpose.
I took a couple of year hit. I don't know what it would have grown to if I hadn't borrowed out. There's all these metrics about, never touch that, never touch that. But I didn't have a choice. I had nothing else.
You had to live.
So it was there. It was there. But if I hadn't started, even with that small amount when I was so young, 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, I wouldn't have had what I had. And I think there is a tremendous need for people to really understand the value of like 401ks or 403bs and putting things away, the value of putting things in a mutual fund, which is also challenging to get out. You don't want to mess with that. You have to pay taxes and do these things like that. Can't I just leave it there? The value of a CD, the value of a home equity line once you own your home. I mean, there's just basic, they are in the end basic things, but we don't really pay attention to them. And it's difficult. I know when I was growing up, there were things you never talked about with other people. You didn't talk about money, you didn't talk about politics, you didn't talk about religion.
And quite honestly, this topic is one that a lot of times you don't talk about happiness in retirement because there are a lot of unhappy people in retirement, but we view it as the golden years. And if we don't talk about it, it never changes. We just keep feeding more people into really kind of a defunct system. So we need to talk about the financial things, and we need to talk about kind of our internal well-being, and what has worked for others might actually work for me.
Well, and it's also, I think, thinking about what it is that you want to do. I remember at some point reading something or going to a workshop or something. It was sort of like, well, if you had, if you could work 3 days a week or you could work 2 days a week, like what would you do? Because many people, I have friends who say, like, if I could just work only 4 days a week, or and the question was, what would you do with the other day?
Right.
Like, what would you actually do?
Yeah.
And it was very difficult for people to, it's like, well, I just don't want to work this much, but they didn't have anything to do the other day. I had no trouble. It's like,
I've got all these hobbies I want to do.
This is not a problem.
But I think some of that goes into the planning. When you were living your life, because you were really living it, not just going to work. You were developing not only all these different skills, but friendships. I mean, I heard you say that you traveled back to Japan because that, in a way, built upon the relationships that were made so many years
30
earlier.
years ago,
and a lot of the other travel, that just the leisure travel. To what extent has friendship been core to this?
Well,
the friendships that we develop over the years.
It's huge. I have these ancient long-term relationships where I can not see people for 20 years and it's just like yesterday. I think that's really an important part of my life. I think it's a great advantage in terms of sort of just being happy in community. I think we need others. But also, I wasn't sure when I was young that as I moved or was out of school, how I would make other friends. Because work is work, but then friends are friends, and they aren't always the same. And
yet that's where we tend to meet people.
Yeah, but we
at
meet
work
people,
or at school.
Yeah,
when
who
you're
we're
younger.
with all day. And I found, of course, the ability, to make very important friendships all throughout my life, and the ones that have carried, that are 30, 40 years old are incredibly important, but also I'm meeting new people or doing new things, or 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. So that circle of people continues to expand and shift. And I've also lost a lot of people. Many very close people to me have died too young, in their 50s. And so I think that's also been an important factor in looking at, well, what do I want to do when I'm still fully able to do it?
Yeah.
And I've known a lot of people who waited, like you said, till they were 70 or 75 to really, think, oh, and then I'll have enough everything to travel. But then they really can't.
Right.
And so my thought was, if I can travel in my 60s, I might be more likely, or be more likely to stay active in my 70s. Where if I just worked myself up to that point, I might be too exhausted at that level. So it is a balance. You know, we don't know how many days we have left. We don't know how many years we have left.
Make the
for
most of
sure.
it while we're here.
And it's so fascinating. We could listen to your stories of retirement, but I came across this quote that reminded me of you. You've been such an important mentor in my life, and it's not just reflective of how you're living retirement, but I think how you've lived your career and your life in general. And the quote is by Maya Angelou. I keep bringing Maya Angelou into this conversation, but I love her. And she said, "Life is pure adventure, and the sooner we realize that, the quicker we will be able to treat life as art." And I think you've done that.
Well, thank you.
So,
Life is awesome.
yeah, it is. It is. So I see we're out of time. This topic had so many touch points with the research that we've been discussing.
Yes, it really does. So do you have any final words of advice for those that may be considering retirement?
Just say yes.